No one attended this auction, so I bought a Galactic Starship. What was inside? The bid confirmation came through at 2:14 in the morning, and my first thought was not excitement. It was not pride. It was a very calm, very tired voice in the back of my head saying, "Owen, you have made a terrible mistake." I had been awake for 22 hours at that point, sitting in my salvage yard office in rural Nevada, eating cold noodles from a container I had opened 3 hours earlier, scrolling through a surplus liquidation database that my friend Callum had sent me as a joke. Callum ran a small electronics resale operation out of his garage in Arizona, and every few weeks he would forward me listings that were either absurdly cheap or absurdly strange, usually both. The subject line of his message had simply been, "You are going to want to see this one." He was right. I did want to see it. I just did not expect to own it by morning. The listing was buried on page 47 of a Galactic surplus clearance site that required a 6-step verification process just to view its contents. I had gone through the verification out of pure stubbornness, the same stubbornness that had kept me buying and reselling old machinery for 11 years when everyone I knew told me to get a real job. The site was called the Interstellar Asset Clearinghouse, and it was exactly as mundane as that name suggested. Most of its listings were things like decommissioned coolant regulators, expired cargo containers, and broken atmospheric scanners, the kind of stuff that even junk dealers walk past. Lot 7741 Gamma was different. The listing read, "Decommissioned interstellar vessel, class unclassified, condition unverified, hull integrity status unknown, interior contents undisclosed, location, Docking Bay 9, Kepler Way Station, Outer Rim Grid Reference, 44 Sigma, auction open for 40 standard days, starting bid, 11 credits. 11 credits. I had looked up the conversion rate. At the time, 11 Galactic credits was roughly equivalent to $4.30 in US currency, depending on which exchange rate you used. I had spent more than that on the coffee sitting next to my cold noodles. But that was not what caught my attention. What caught my attention was the bidding history. 40 days. The auction had been open for 40 full days, and the current number of bids was 0. Not low. Not disappointing. 0. In a galaxy that, according to every contact I had made in the 12 months since first contact with the Thorellian trade delegation, had redefined human understanding of the universe, contained over 4,000 spacefaring species, not one had placed a single bid on this ship. I knew enough about galactic commerce by then to understand what that meant. When something goes unwanted in a market that large, it is not because no one noticed. It is because everyone noticed, and everyone made the same decision. I placed the bid anyway. The confirmation arrived in my inbox 37 seconds later with a subject line that read, in the clunky translation my software provided, "Congratulations on your acquisition, and please review the attached terms of liability transfer." The attached document was 412 pages long. My translation software tried to render it and produced an error message that simply said, "Document complexity exceeds processing parameters." I closed it. I finished my noodles. I went to sleep. When I woke up, I had 17 messages from the Interstellar Asset Clearinghouse, 4 from the Kepler Way Station Administration Office, and 1 from a species I had never heard of called the Velhari Compact, whose subject line read, "Regarding your recent acquisition. Please do not proceed." I read that last one twice. Then, I booked transport. Getting from rural Nevada to Kepler Way Station was not as complicated as it had been a year ago, but it was not simple either. The first leg was a commercial flight to Los Angeles, then an arrangement through a freight brokerage that Callum had introduced me to, then a connecting transit through the Thorellian Gateway Hub at what used to be called High Earth Orbit, and finally a 3-day cargo hop on a vessel called the Durable Patience, which was operated by a husband and wife team of Gorethian traders who spoke very little translated English, but communicated their feelings about my luggage through a series of expressive hand gestures. My luggage was 2 duffel bags and a toolbox. They still seemed annoyed. I spent the transit time studying whatever I could find about Kepler Way Station. It was not much. The station existed at the edge of what the major galactic powers called mapped space, which was a diplomatic way of saying it sat in a region most civilized governments pretended was not their problem. It had been built by 3 different species across 200 years, and expanded haphazardly by at least 9 others, which meant its architecture looked like someone had taken 5 different cities, broken them apart, and reassembled them without looking at any of the original plans. It processed about 40,000 travelers a month, most of them traders, salvagers, and people who needed to be somewhere no one would look for them. It was, in short, the kind of place I felt completely at home in. The durable patients docked at Kepler Way Station on a Thursday afternoon, local station time, and I walked off the cargo ramp into a docking corridor that smelled like machine oil, ozone, and something sweet I could not identify, and decided not to investigate. The station was loud in the way that crowded places are always loud, a layered noise of machinery and voices, and the particular hum of artificial gravity systems working slightly harder than they should. I found the administrative office on the 3rd level, which required taking 2 elevators and a walkway that was clearly designed for a species with a very different stride length than humans. The office was managed by a Thorellian clerk named something that my translator rendered as Administrator Vol, and Vol had 6 arms, gray-blue skin, and the expression of someone who had been dealing with other people's problems for 30 uninterrupted years. I slid my auction confirmation across the desk. The translation I had received called it a notice of completed transfer, and I had printed it out because I had learned in the past year that showing a physical document to a non-human administrator was almost always more effective than sending a digital file. Vol looked at the document. Then Vol looked at me. Then all 6 arms moved at once in a gesture that no species I had encountered used, which told me it was either a deeply personal reaction or something automatic and involuntary. Vol put the document down very carefully on the desk, as if it were fragile, which it was not, since it was a piece of standard printer paper. "You are the purchaser," Vol said. The translator rendered the voice flat and neutral, but the expression on Vol's face was not neutral. It was the expression of someone standing at the edge of something they could not see the bottom of. "I am," I said. Vol was quiet for a moment. Then Vol opened a drawer, removed a keycard, and placed it on top of my document without saying another word. "That's it?" I asked. "The docking bay is on level 7, Vol said. Section 9. I would recommend reading the liability transfer document before entry." "I tried," I said. "It crashed my translator." Vol looked at me for a long moment. "Yes," Vol said quietly. "It would." I picked up the keycard and walked away. I did not look back, but I had the distinct feeling that every set of eyes in that office was watching me go. Level 7 took 15 minutes to reach, and Section 9 was at the far end of a long, poorly lit corridor that the station's other occupants seemed to treat as a route to be walked quickly and not lingered in. I passed 2 Gorethian dock workers who saw where I was heading and crossed to the other side of the corridor without speaking. A small group of species I did not recognize paused their conversation as I passed, and resumed it only after I had moved well beyond them. The bay door was sealed with a triple lock mechanism, which the keycard handled automatically, and it was large enough to suggest that what was behind it was significantly bigger than anything I had seen in the station's other docking areas. The door itself was plain, functional, utilitarian, but above it, stenciled in a neat row, were markings in 17 different languages, and one set of symbols I had never seen in any database. My translator worked through them one by one, and returned the same result for each. 2 words: "Do not open." I stood there reading them for a while, long enough for a passing maintenance worker to stop, see what I was looking at, and then move on with the particular hurried step of someone who has decided this is not their situation to be involved in. I held the keycard up to the lock panel and pressed it firmly against the sensor. The lock disengaged with 3 separate clicks, and then a low, deep sound came from within the door, a long, slow exhalation of pressurized air releasing from a sealed space. Not a violent rush, not a warning sound, more like a breath. The breath of something that had been holding it for a very long time. The door slid open. The first thing I noticed was the size. The docking bay was enormous, much larger than the corridor had suggested, and the ship inside filled it almost completely from wall to wall. In the dim light of the bay's standard overhead panels, I could see that the hull was dark, a deep color that was almost black but not quite, and it absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, so that standing and looking at it was like trying to focus on a shadow that had been given a fixed shape. The ship was long and curved in a way that no human-built vessel was. Not angular, not exactly streamlined, but organic in its proportions. As though it had grown into its shape rather than been constructed into it. There were no visible weapons. No obvious engines, at least not ones I could identify. No markings on the outside except one, near what I assumed was the main entry hatch. A single symbol that matched none of the 17 languages above the bay door, but was clearly from the same unknown system. The ship was old. I could feel that in the way you feel the age of a thing when you stand close to it. Not broken, not ruined, just old in the way that mountains are old, in the way that the ocean is old, in a way that made the station around it feel young and temporary by comparison. I walked toward it slowly. My footsteps echoed off the bay walls, and the sound came back to me wrong, slightly altered, as if the ship's hull was absorbing part of each sound and returning only what it chose to return. I walked the full length of it before I stopped, and by the time I reached the far end, I had revised my initial size estimate upward by about 40%. This was not a shuttle. This was not a mid-range transport vessel. This was something in a category that I did not have a precise word for yet, though the word I kept coming back to, the word that arrived in my mind without invitation, was warship, and it stayed there no matter how many times I tried to replace it with something less alarming. I came back to the entry hatch and stood in front of it. The key card I was holding worked on the bay door. I had no particular reason to think it would work here too. I pressed it against the panel next to the hatch anyway. The hatch opened. Pressurized air moved past me gently, carrying with it the smell of a sealed space that had been waiting. A dry, still smell with no trace of decay, which told me that whatever life support this ship ran on had been maintaining itself without interruption for a very long time. The interior was dark. My flashlight found the nearest wall and traced it slowly, picking up details one at a time. Smooth surfaces, clean lines, a corridor extending inward that was wide enough for two people to walk side by side. I stepped inside. Behind me, the hatch closed on its own. The locks engaged with a sound like 3 quiet final words. I stood very still in the dark, with my flashlight, and thought about all the messages I had not answered before I left Earth, and about the 412-page liability document I had not read, and about the fact that every single being on this station who had seen where I was going had reacted the same way, and about the 2 words stenciled above the bay door in 17 languages. Then I walked forward. Because I am Owen Calder, I am 34 years old, I run a salvage yard in Nevada, and when I find a door that no one has been willing to open, my first instinct has always been to find out why. That instinct has gotten me into trouble more times than I can count. It has also found me things worth more than I ever expected. I walked forward into the dark, and the ship breathed quietly around me, and somewhere deep in its structure, something that had been sleeping for a very long time began, very slowly, to wake. The corridor extended for 30 meters before it opened into a wider space that I could not fully see in any direction with just my flashlight. I swept the beam left, then right, then up, and my brain spent a full 3 seconds refusing to process what the light was showing it. The ceiling was high, very high, and across it, arranged in patterns I could not immediately interpret, were lights, hundreds of them, small, pale, and cold, like stars caught behind glass. They were not on, but as my flashlight beam passed over them, they flickered, not randomly. One at a time, in sequence, following the beam like something watching where I pointed. "Okay," I said aloud, mostly to have something familiar to hear. My voice came back to me from every direction at once. Somewhere ahead, in the dark, something clicked. Then another click. Then a low hum that started below my ability to hear it, and rose slowly into the range where I could feel it in my chest, before I could hear it with my ears. The corridor I had come from was gone. Not blocked, not sealed, simply gone. The space behind me was now a smooth, unbroken wall, as if the entry hatch had never existed. I looked at the smooth wall for about 4 seconds. I looked at the room in front of me. I looked at the lights on the ceiling, which were now all watching me, all tracking my flashlight, all flickering in that slow, deliberate sequence. The hum grew louder, the pale lights brightened, and from somewhere ahead, from somewhere deep inside a ship that no one in the galaxy had been willing to purchase for 11 credits, a voice emerged from the silence. It was calm and precise and completely without emotion, and it spoke in English, which it absolutely should not have been able to do. "Human detected," it said. "Recalibrating protocols." A pause. During that pause, every light in the room came on at once. "Welcome home," the voice said. I stood in the full light of a 300-year-old alien warship in a docking bay on the edge of explored space, with a flashlight I no longer needed, and thought, 11 credits. I paid 11 credits for this. Then the voice spoke again. "I have been waiting for a considerable amount of time," it said. "There are matters we need to discuss. Some of them are urgent. 2 of them I would suggest qualify as emergencies. I will begin with the most important." "Sure," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "The ship you are standing in," the voice said, "is not a decommissioned vessel. It never was. The auction was a filter. You are the first entity in 312 years to pass it." I thought about that. "What were the others being filtered for?" I asked. "Fear," the voice said. "You are the first bidder in 312 years who was not afraid to open the door." Outside, somewhere beyond the hull, the station continued its business. 40,000 travelers moving through their days, none of them looking toward Section 9, none of them wanting to know. Inside, the lights were fully on, and I was standing in the most important room I had ever entered in my life, and I did not know that yet. I would know it very soon. The auction that no one attended had found exactly who it was looking for. It had just taken 312 years. And now, with every system on the ship powering up around me in sequence, with lights activating in corridors I had not yet walked, and machinery humming to life in rooms I had not yet found, I stood in the center of it all, 34 years old, still holding my flashlight out of pure habit, thinking about the liability document I had not read. I had a feeling the next 412 pages of my life were going to be significantly more interesting than the ones that had come before. I was not wrong. The second emergency the ship's voice mentioned could wait, it told me. The first could not. Somewhere in the galaxy, something had already detected that this ship had woken up, and it was already moving. Owen Calder, salvage dealer, Nevada, Earth, had 11 minutes to decide whether he was going to run or stay. He did not run. He never did. I put my flashlight in my jacket pocket, looked up at the ceiling full of awakened lights and said, "All right, start from the beginning. Tell me everything." The ship's voice, which would later tell me its name, was a chord, began to speak. I listened. And outside, in the dark between stars, something old and patient and very, very large began to change course. Accord did not speak the way I expected a ship's computer to speak. Most AI systems I had encountered, even the advanced galactic ones, talked in straight lines. You asked a question, you received an answer. The answer was complete. There was no texture to it. Accord was different. Accord paused at certain words the way a person pauses when they are choosing carefully, the way someone pauses when they know that what they are about to say is going to change something. "Before I begin," Accord said, "I need to confirm that you understand the nature of what you have entered into." "I bought a ship," I said. "You entered a filter," Accord said. "The auction was constructed as a test of a specific quality, not intelligence, not wealth, not tactical knowledge. The Velthari, who built this vessel, believed that the most dangerous quality in a civilized being is the fear of the unknown. They believed that any species advanced enough to reshape a galaxy was also advanced enough to destroy one, and that the only reliable safeguard against destruction at that scale was curiosity, not courage. Curiosity. Courage can be manufactured. Curiosity cannot." I looked around the room I was standing in, taking it in more carefully now that the lights were fully on. The walls were not bare. They were covered in something that was almost like writing, but arranged in 3 dimensions, characters that overlapped and layered, and crossed through each other, in ways that made my eyes lose focus if I stared too long. "What are those?" I asked, pointing at the walls. "The ship's memory," Accord said. "Every event recorded aboard this vessel since its construction is encoded there. You are standing inside its log. That hit me differently than I expected. I was standing inside someone else's history, written on every surface around me, a history I could not read. The Veilthari, I said. I've never heard that name. You would not have, Accord said. The removal of their records from galactic archives was thorough. It was also intentional. There are parties in this galaxy who have spent considerable resources ensuring that the Veilthari are not remembered. Who? I will reach that, Accord said. First, the ship. Accord guided me through the vessel in a way that was less like a tour and more like a gradual introduction to something I was not fully ready to understand. The corridors branched in patterns that seemed random, until Accord explained that the layout was designed around the Veilthari's understanding of how information should flow. The most critical systems were at the center. The further from the center you moved, the less essential the function. It was a philosophy built into the architecture. The engine room was not what I expected an engine room to look like. There were no visible fuel systems, no conventional drive components, nothing that matched any propulsion design I had seen in either human or alien engineering. The central space contained what looked, at first, like a large column of dark water, suspended in an open cylinder without any visible container. It moved slowly, rotating in a direction my brain kept insisting was not a real direction. What is that? I asked. The drive core, Accord said. The Veilthari did not push against space to move through it. They folded it. This vessel can cross distances that would take a conventional drive 3 decades in approximately 16 hours. I looked at the slow rotation of the impossible column and thought about what that meant for the conversations I was about to have with every government and military organization on Earth. How many of these ships exist? I asked. 1, Accord said. This one. We moved deeper. Accord brought me through quarters that had once been lived in, and were now still, past common areas where the furniture was built for bodies shaped differently than mine, through workrooms and navigation spaces, and areas whose function I could not determine, even with Accord's explanations. The ship was not empty, not in the way that abandoned places are empty. It felt like a house, where the family had stepped out and not yet come back. Everything in its place, everything maintained. Accord, I said, in a corridor that led toward the lower section of the vessel. How long have you been running alone? 312 years, 4 months, and 17 days, Accord said. What happened to the crew? The pause that followed was different from Accord's other pauses, longer, more deliberate. They left, Accord said. They made a decision, collectively and voluntarily, to abandon the ship at a specific point in its mission. They did not leave because they were in danger. They left because they believed that what was aboard this vessel would be safer without them near it. They feared that their presence would draw attention. Did they go home? The Veilthari do not have a home, Accord said. Not anymore. They made a choice, sometime before this crew departed, to disperse, to scatter across the galaxy in forms that could not be traced. Whether any of them still exist in any recognizable form is not something I can tell you. I stopped walking. They gave everything up to protect what's on this ship? Yes. What's on this ship, Accord? Another pause. Then, I will show you. But I want you to understand something first. The cargo manifest for this vessel lists one item. It has no name in any galactic language. The symbol that represents it is one your translator will not process, because the symbol was designed to resist automated translation. It requires a thinking mind to interpret it. And what does it mean to a thinking mind? It means, Accord said, second chance. The door at the end of the corridor was different from every other door I had encountered on the ship. The others had opened when I approached. This one waited. It had a panel beside it, and the panel was dark, and it stayed dark even when I held the keycard to it. This door requires more than a keycard, Accord said. It requires authorization. Verbal, from a representative of a species recognized by the Veilthari's founding charter. What species are recognized? As of today, Accord said, only one species in the active galaxy qualifies. The others have either achieved transcendence or ceased to exist. I thought about that. Humans. The Veilthari studied every spacefaring civilization and every pre-spacefaring civilization they encountered, Accord said. They maintained projections of which species would survive long enough to be useful. Humans were not the most advanced. They were not the most peaceful. They were not the most organized. But they were, in the Valthari's analysis, the most likely to be standing when the crisis they foresaw arrived. Why? Because humans, Accord said, do not stop. I looked at the dark panel. I put my hand on it. The panel lit up. Verbal authorization required, Accord said. State your name, your species, and your intent. Owen Calder, I said. Human. I want to know what's inside. The door opened. What was behind it was not what I expected. I had been building in my mind toward something dramatic, something vast, something visually overwhelming. What I found instead was a room that looked, at first glance, almost quiet. Rows of crystalline structures, each about the height and shape of a large vase, arranged in concentric circles that extended back further than the room should have been able to hold. Each structure glowed faintly from within, a different color for each one, and the collective light they produced was soft and even and cool. There were thousands of them. What are these? I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended it to. Archives, Accord said. Genetic, cultural, and technological archives. Each structure contains the complete recorded existence of one species. Their biology, their history, their language, their art, their knowledge, their values, everything they were. I walked slowly between the rows. The light changed as I moved, different colors washing over me in sequence, each one slightly different in quality, slightly different in temperature. How many? I asked. 41,217 species, Accord said. Of those, 38,904 are extinct. I stopped walking. Extinct, I repeated. Yes. All of them? Naturally? The pause that followed was the longest one yet. No, Accord said. A significant number were not natural extinctions. The Valthari documented, across their centuries of record-keeping, a pattern of civilizations disappearing at rates and in circumstances that could not be explained by natural causes. They found evidence, buried in the data, of coordinated action, a group of civilizations working in concert to reduce what they called the noise of the galaxy. I turned around slowly, looking at the thousands of glowing structures surrounding me, each one a species that was gone. Someone killed them, I said. Many of them, Accord said. The Valthari called the group responsible the Quorum of Silence. 7 civilizations, each one among the most powerful in the galaxy, who reached an agreement centuries ago that the galaxy functioned more efficiently with fewer independent voices in it. They're still active? Yes. They're still doing it? They have been selective, Accord said. In recent centuries, they have focused primarily on suppression rather than elimination, controlling access to technology, restricting communication between developing worlds, ensuring that no new civilization rises quickly enough to challenge the existing structure. They have only moved to more direct measures when a civilization showed signs of becoming aware of the pattern. I thought about Earth. I thought about first contact, 12 months ago. I thought about the speed with which galactic trade agreements had been extended to humanity, the friendly delegations, the warm diplomatic language, the way every major galactic power had seemed almost eager to bring humanity into the fold quickly. They know about us, I said. They have known about humans for approximately 300 years, Accord said. They classified humanity as pre-relevant for most of that time, a developing species, not yet worth the investment of suppression. That assessment was scheduled for review. When? Soon, Accord said. The review was triggered by first contact. The speed of human integration into galactic commerce concerned several Quorum members. Humans adapt quickly. The Quorum prefers species that do not adapt quickly. I stood in the center of 40,000 glowing archives and felt the weight of what I was standing in pressed down on me in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. What does the continuance engine do? I asked. I had not been told about it yet. The words arrived in my mind without a source, fully formed, as though the room had placed them there. You felt it, Accord said. There was something in the AI's voice I had not heard before, something close to surprise. The name just appeared in my head, I said. Is that normal? The archive interfaces with minds that enter the room, Accord said. It does not transmit information fully. It transmits awareness. You know the name because this room wanted you to know it. That's not unsettling at all, I said. The continuance engine, Accord said, is the device at the center of this room, the structure that all the others face. I had not noticed it before, because it was less visually striking than the archive surrounding it. A low platform, dark, with a single flat surface that was neither lit nor dark, but something between the two. It looked like a desk. It looked like the most important desk in the history of the universe. It can restart a species, Accord said, from the archive alone. Given sufficient time and resources, the continuance engine can rebuild a civilization from its stored genetic and cultural records. It can bring back what was taken. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the archive room, between the glowing structures of 38,904 extinct species, and I put my face in my hands for about 30 seconds. Not from despair, from the sheer size of the thing I was holding. Then I looked up. What does it need to activate? I asked. Authorization from a representative of a living species recognized by the Charter, Accord said, which means you. And if I authorize it, it will begin the restoration process for the first species in the queue, Accord said. The process is slow, years, in most cases, but it begins. Which species is first? The Aravahi, Accord said. They were the first civilization the Quorum eliminated. The Veilthari placed them first in the queue as a form of acknowledgement. I looked at the platform in the center of the room. I looked at the thousands of lights surrounding it. There's a second part, I said, to what you need to tell me. Yes, Accord said. Tell me. When you touch the continuance engine panel to authorize entry, Accord said, the ship's beacon activated. A low-frequency signal, undetectable by conventional scanners, but not undetectable by systems designed to look for it. Who designed those systems? The Quorum of Silence, Accord said. They have been looking for this ship for 3 centuries. They did not know its location. They knew only that it existed, and that it contained a record of what they had done. I stood up. How long do we have? I asked. Based on the positions of the nearest Quorum monitoring posts at last known data, Accord said, approximately 6 hours before the first vessels arrive. Based on projections of the full Quorum response, we should expect in the range of 40 to 45 separate fleets within 36 hours. I walked back to the corridor. I walked past the drive core and its impossible rotating column. I walked back toward the main bay where I had first entered, sat down on the floor of the corridor, and stared at the wall. 6 hours. 43 fleets. 1 human with 2 duffel bags and a toolbox. Accord, I said. What would the crew have done in this situation? The crew, Accord said, never encountered this situation. They left specifically to prevent it from arising. They believed that the ship being found was a failure state. But the Veilthari built the auction. They planned for the ship to be found. By the right person, Accord said, under the right conditions. What those conditions meant in practice, I was not told. I thought about that. You were waiting, I said. 300 years, alone, waiting for someone to pass the filter. And you still don't know what happens next. No, Accord said. The Veilthari were thorough in many ways. In this way, they left the next steps to the judgment of whoever arrived. So it's on me. It has been on you since you pressed the keycard to the bay door, Accord said. I looked at the wall for another few seconds. Then I said, show me the communications array, and then show me the weapons systems, and then tell me everything you know about the Quorum of Silence. Everything. Don't skip anything, because you think I can't handle it. Understood, Accord said. The lights in the corridor shifted subtly, as if the ship was settling into a new mode. Not alert, not alarmed, ready. Something that had been sleeping for 3 centuries was fully awake now, and it was paying attention. So was I. Outside the hull, in the vast dark between Kepler Way Station and the rest of the galaxy, the space that most civilizations agreed was not worth their trouble, was about to become the most contested region in 4,000 years of interstellar politics. And at the center of all of it, sitting on the floor of a corridor in the most important vessel in the history of the galaxy, was a salvage dealer from Nevada who had paid $4.30 for all of it. I stood up. I put my flashlight back in my pocket. I rolled up my sleeves. "All right, Accord," I said. "Let's figure out what we're doing. The communications array on a Veilthari dreadnought is not a room. It is an experience." I understood that the moment Accord led me into it, and every surface in the space responded to my presence by lighting up with layered signal maps, each one displaying a different frequency band, each one alive with movement. Signals from Kepler Way Station, signals from the shipping lanes, signals from the outer monitoring posts of 6 different governments, all of it flowing across the walls in real time, a living picture of everything being said in a wide radius around us. And at the edge of that picture, moving through it, with the kind of deliberate, coordinated behavior that only organized military fleets produce, were 43 clusters of signal activity. They had not been there when I first arrived. "They moved fast," I said. "Faster than my projections," Accord said, which was a sentence I did not enjoy hearing from an AI that had been running for 3 centuries. The nearest Quorum fleet was closer than my last known data suggested. "They have been repositioning assets into this region for some time. I believe they suspected the ship would eventually be found, even if they did not know when or where. How long have we actually got?" "The first fleet will reach communication range within 90 minutes, Accord said. "Weapons range in 3 hours and 40 minutes. I looked at the signal maps. 43 clusters, each one representing multiple vessels, each one moving with the smooth, practiced coordination of a military force that had been doing this for centuries. Then I looked at the archive room in my mind. 38,904 glowing structures. Every one of them a civilization that had met fleets like these at the worst possible moment. "Tell me about the weapon," I said. Accord was quiet for 2 seconds, which was long. "The Veilthari built this vessel with a primary function that they considered more important than any drive system or any archive," Accord said. "They called it the resonance array. In their language, the name is closer to the phrase, the thing that makes forgetting impossible." "What does it do?" "It broadcasts," Accord said. "A signal unlike any conventional communication. Not transmitted through standard galactic relay networks. Not dependent on line of sight or repeater stations. It propagates through a medium that all matter shares, what your physics might call the quantum substrate. The signal carries information, and it carries something else. Something the Veilthari called memory weight. When the resonance array broadcasts a record, every mind within its range does not simply receive the information. They experience it, not as their own memory, as witnessed fact. You cannot dismiss a broadcast from the resonance array as propaganda or fabrication. You cannot misinterpret it or argue its accuracy. You were not there, but you know it as though you were. I stared at the signal map with its 43 approaching clusters. "The Quorum killed 40,000 civilizations," I said slowly. 38,904 confirmed, Accord said. "And if I fire the resonance array with that evidence loaded into it, every being within range will know it," Accord said. "Not as a claim, not as a historical account, as witnessed fact." "How wide is the range?" "At full power, 200 light-years in every direction." I sat down at the communications console, though it was not built for a human body, and the angle was wrong in 3 different ways. "And the Quorum knows the ship has this." "Yes, it is the primary reason they have spent 3 centuries searching for it. It's also why they can't just sit outside and fire at us." "Correct," Accord said. "Destroying this vessel before I can broadcast would eliminate the threat permanently. However, I have one defensive capability they cannot overcome with weapons." "What?" "Speed," Accord said. "The resonance array requires 47 seconds to charge and fire at full capacity. The fold drive requires 11 seconds to engage and execute a jump. If they fire on us, we can jump before the weapons reach us. If we charge the array, we can complete the broadcast before they can close to weapons range from their current position. The 2 capabilities are mutually exclusive. We can run, or we can broadcast. We cannot do both." "And if we run?" "We survive," Accord said, "and the archive survives." and the quorum reseals the galaxy's memory of what they have done. If we broadcast, every mind within 200 light-years will know the truth, Accord said, including the crews of 43 quorum fleets, including every being on every station, freighter, and inhabited world in that range. The information cannot be taken back, but we will not be able to run after we broadcast. We will be stationary for 47 seconds, and 43 fleets will be within firing range. But we activate the continuance engine first, I said. A pause. That was not part of my scenario analysis. Add it, I said. If I authorize the engine before we broadcast, the restoration process for the Aravahi begins. Even if we don't survive what happens after the broadcast, the restoration is already running. Accord was silent for 4 seconds. The authorization imprint, once given, cannot be revoked by the quorum without physical access to the core, Accord said slowly. If the restoration is initiated before the vessel is destroyed, it will continue from whatever backup systems the quorum cannot locate. Where are the backup systems? I cannot tell you that, Accord said, not because I am withholding information, but because the Veilthari encrypted that knowledge at a level above my own access. I know the backups exist. I do not know where they are. The Veilthari planned for this, I said. They planned for many things, Accord said. They planned for someone like me, I said. Someone who would activate the ship, who would authorize the engine, who would fire the array. They planned for someone who was going to make this choice. Yes, Accord said. And they didn't leave any notes about what happens next. They left you, Accord said. That was their note. I looked at the communications wall. The first quorum fleet was 90 minutes out. The others were spreading behind it in a formation I recognized from military history books on Earth, a surrounding pattern designed to eliminate the possibility of escape in any direction. Experienced, practiced. These were forces that had done this before, many times. Then my eye caught something else in the signal map. 3 of the 43 clusters were not in formation. 2 were moving at different angles to the others, and 1 had stopped entirely. Those 3, I said, pointing. They're not part of the cordon. No, Accord said. I noticed that as well. I was waiting to see if you would. Why are they separate? I do not know, Accord said. But their signal profiles are different from the others. The formation fleets are broadcasting on encrypted quorum military frequencies. Those 3 are broadcasting on frequencies I recognize from the Veilthari's own records. They are very old frequencies, frequencies that have not been used in 300 years. I leaned forward. They know those frequencies. Yes. Who would know 300-year-old Veilthari frequencies? Someone, Accord said carefully, who has been waiting for this ship to wake up. I opened a transmission channel on the console, guessing at the interface through sheer determination and Accord's patient guidance when I got it wrong. I aimed it at all 3 separate clusters simultaneously and broadcast in the simplest way I knew, a wide, unencrypted, open signal. No code, no protocol, just words. I'm Owen Calder, I said. I'm on the ship you've been waiting for. I know about the archive and the engine and the array. If you're who I think you are, answer me, and do it quickly, because we have about 85 minutes before this situation becomes a much more specific kind of problem. Silence for 40 seconds. Then 3 responses arrived simultaneously, from 3 different species, in 3 different languages, all of them translated by Accord into the same clear, plain words. We have been waiting 200 years for this contact. Tell us what you need. We are ready. I had not expected to feel relief in that moment. I had expected to feel more afraid, but the relief was real and immediate. The sharp loosening of something that had been tight in my chest since the moment I first pressed the keycard to the bay door. Accord, I said. Who are they? Based on signal profiles and the frequencies they are using, Accord said, they are the Thirel Collective, the Mare Ascendancy, and a group calling itself the Free Remnant. All 3 were members of the Quorum of Silence. All 3 were coerced into membership and have been operating within the Quorum, while attempting to resist its directives for the past 2 centuries. They've been waiting for the ship, I said. They have been waiting for what the ship represents, Accord said. Proof. Evidence that is undeniable. The resonance array is not just a weapon against the Quorum's power. It is the one thing that would allow the Quorum's coerced members to break free without being dismissed as liars. I began transmitting, not to the 3 allied fleets, to the archive room, to Accord's internal systems, pulling together the specific records that would serve best, the confirmed extinctions, the evidence of coordinated action, the dates, the orders, the full documented record of what the Quorum of Silence had done across 3 centuries. I'm going to broadcast a portion of this first, I said. Not everything. A selection. Enough to tell the galaxy what's happening here today. Enough that if the Quorum destroys this ship, they cannot claim the broadcast was a fabrication. Tactically sound, Accord said. If the initial broadcast reaches galactic relay networks before the ship is destroyed, it becomes part of the permanent record, regardless of what follows. Can the 3 fleets screen us while we broadcast? They can delay the primary Quorum force, Accord said. Not indefinitely. I don't need indefinitely. I need 47 seconds. I opened a channel to all 3 Allied commanders simultaneously. Here's what I need, I said, and I told them. Plainly, without military terminology, without strategic phrasing, in the same direct way I would explain a salvage operation to a new worker. What we were doing. What we needed them to do. What was going to happen? A pause from all 3. Then the commander of the Thorell Collective, whose voice came through as deep and measured and absolutely certain, said, "We have waited 200 years to do exactly this. We are already moving." The Mare Ascendancy responded with a single word in their language that Accord translated as, "Understood." The Free Remnant did not respond in words. They responded by immediately changing their course to place their vessels directly between the approaching primary Quorum fleet and the unremembered Mercy. "Accord," I said, "prepare the resonance array." "Charging," Accord said. "Load the selected archive segments, the confirmed extinctions, the Quorum's command records, the full timeline of the coordination." Loaded. Secondary load. The Aravahi archive. First in the queue. Authorization for the continuance engine. "Can you transmit the authorization into the broadcast?" A pause. "That is not a function the resonance array was designed for," Accord said. "But the array transmits information through the quantum substrate. If the authorization carries sufficient memory weight, it will propagate alongside the primary broadcast." "What counts as sufficient memory weight?" "Intent," Accord said. "Clarity of purpose." The Veilthari believed that the quantum substrate responds to the sincerity of the mind creating the information. "So it responds to whether I mean it." "Yes," Accord said. I thought about 38,904 glowing structures in a room at the center of this ship. I thought about what it meant to be a species that someone took the time to record, to preserve, to place in a queue, and hope that someday, somehow, someone would bring them back. "I mean it," I said. "Charging at 60%, Accord said. On the signal map, the 3 Allied fleets had moved into position between us and the primary Quorum advance. The Quorum fleet was slowing, calculating, running the same problem I had already solved. If they fired on the Allied fleets, we would have time to complete the broadcast. If they bypassed the Allied fleets, they would expose their flanks. The Quorum was not used to problems they could not solve with direct force. "Charging at 78%, Accord said. A new signal arrived on the communications array. From the primary Quorum fleet. It was directed at me. "Human," a voice said. Translated flat, but the structure of the sentence carried contempt that translation could not remove. "You do not understand what you are participating in. You have stumbled into a situation that has been managed carefully for centuries for the benefit of galactic stability. What you call evidence is a narrative constructed by a species that no longer exists to explain it. Stand down. Surrender the vessel. You will be treated fairly." I looked at the signal map. I thought about the 412-page liability document that had crashed my translator. I pressed transmit. "I appreciate the offer," I said. "But here's the thing. I've read enough of the archive to know what galactic stability means to your organization. And I've been in salvage long enough to know that when someone tells you a damaged item is fine, and you should just put it back where you found it, the item is usually not fine, and they very much do not want you to know why." A pause from the Quorum fleet. "Charging at 91%, Accord said. I kept talking. Not because I thought I could convince the Quorum fleet of anything, but because every second I spent transmitting was a second the Quorum spent listening and calculating rather than acting. "You've had 3 centuries to make this right on your own," I said. "You didn't, so I'm going to help." "Charging at 100%, Accord said. "Array ready." "Fire," I said. The ship did not shake. It did not make a dramatic sound. The resonance array activated with a low hum that I felt more in my mind than in my body, a sustained note that lasted exactly 47 seconds, and in those 47 seconds, everything the archive held about the Quorum of Silence and its 3 centuries of coordinated elimination moved outward through the quantum substrate in every direction at once, propagating through matter itself, reaching every mind within 200 light-years, arriving not as a message but as a memory. I felt it leave the ship. I felt it go. And somewhere in the galactic relay network, the first fragments of it were already embedding themselves in the permanent record, unreachable, uneditable, undeletable. It was done. In the 48th second, 12 Quorum warships opened fire. 12 warships fired, and nothing happened. Not nothing in the sense that I was protected or shielded, or that some clever defense system had activated at the last possible second. Nothing in the sense that the weapons discharged, the energy readings spiked on every sensor in the communications array, and then the shots simply did not arrive. I stared at the display. "Accord," I said. "What happened?" "The weapons hit us," Accord said. "We're still here." "Yes," Accord said. "The hull material of this vessel is Veilthari composite, a substance that does not exist in any current galactic database, because the Veilthari did not share its formula with any other civilization. It is not a shield. It does not deflect or absorb energy in the conventional sense. It converts incoming energy into information, stores it in the memory lattice you saw on the walls of the main corridor, and returns a negligible fraction of it as heat." I looked at the display showing the firing warships. "They just wrote in your journal." "That is an accurate summary," Accord said. "Can you fire back?" "I would strongly recommend against it," Accord said. "The Veilthari did not equip this vessel for conventional warfare. The resonance array is the only weapon this ship carries. What I have, in addition to hull integrity, is maneuverability and speed. At this range, no fleet in the current galaxy can match the fold drive's acceleration or precision. Another barrage from the Quorum warships, another entry in the ship's permanent memory. I watched the energy readings spike and fade and spike and fade, in a rhythm that was almost musical. "They're learning," I said. "They'll switch to something else." "Already," Accord said. 3 of the forward vessels are adjusting to a gravitic compression field. That approach will damage hull integrity. Time? 6 minutes to full field establishment. 6 minutes. I opened communications to the 3 Allied fleets, which had taken damage during the broadcast window, but were still operational, and still positioned between us and the main Quorum force. The Thorell commander answered immediately. "We saw the broadcast initiate," she said. Her voice was controlled and precise, but I could hear something underneath it, something that sounded like the release of a pressure that had been held for a very long time. "It went out," I said. "Full propagation." A silence on the line. Then everything we have done today was worth the cost." "Not yet," I said. "I need to move this ship. I need a gap in the Quorum formation, wide enough for a fold jump, long enough to hold for 11 seconds. "There is no gap," the Thorell commander said. "The Quorum formation is complete. They have closed every vector. Then I need you to make one." Another pause. "We have 4 operational vessels remaining." "I know. I'm sorry." "Do not apologize," she said. "Tell me where you need the gap." I looked at the formation display. The Quorum had closed the cordon well, but I had spent 11 years buying and selling salvage, which meant I had spent 11 years looking at damaged things and finding the one weak point where everything else came apart. The formation had a gap. It was not the gap the Quorum thought was there. It was the gap between the 2 left flank vessels, where the commander had tried to correct for the Allied fleet's interference, and had pulled those ships a fraction too close to each other, creating a corridor that was narrow but real. I marked it on the shared display. "There," I said. "That corridor. I need it held open for 11 seconds." 11 seconds. the Thorell commander repeated. 11 seconds, I said, and then you're done. You pull back to neutral space, you surrender to no one, and you use the fact that the broadcast has already gone out to make the case that your involvement was lawful resistance. And you? I'll be somewhere else, I said. The Thorell commander did not respond immediately. I waited. On the display, the gravitic compression field was at 30% establishment, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Commander Vol of the Thorell Collective, she said, and I heard in her voice the weight of someone who had been waiting for the right moment for 200 years, and was certain, finally, that this was it. Thorell forward elements, advance on my mark. I looked at the display, at the corridor, at the full drive charge timer. Accord, I said. Target the corridor. Spool the drive. The moment that corridor is wide enough, we go. Drive spooling, Accord said. Estimated ready in 9 seconds. Accord. Yes. When we jump, where are we going? I have been preparing a destination since you first asked me about the weapon systems, Accord said. There is a location the Veilthari chose before they departed. A coordinate set they embedded in my deepest memory, sealed behind the same encryption level as the backup system locations. I was not able to access those coordinates until the resonance array fired. The broadcast unlocked them? The completion of the broadcast was the final step in the Veilthari's sequence, Accord said. They built the encryption to unlock only when the array had fired, and the authorization of the continuance engine had been transmitted. When both conditions were met, the final destination was released. Where is it? It is a system with no name in any current galactic atlas, Accord said. It has a designation in the Veilthari's own records. The translation is approximate, but the closest equivalent in English is the place where we went to wait. The Thorell fleet moved. On the display, the 4 remaining Allied vessels accelerated toward the narrow corridor in the Quorum formation, and the Quorum response was exactly what I had calculated it would be, a scramble to reinforce the weakest point in the cordon. But scrambles take time. Even well-trained military forces take time to respond to an unexpected vector of pressure, and in that time, the corridor widened. It widened to 11 seconds worth of space. Drive ready, Accord said. Go, I said. The fold drive engaged. There is no adequate description of what a Veilthari fold jump feels like from inside the vessel. I had been in space transit before, on human vessels and on Thorellian commercial ships, and both involved a sensation of acceleration, of movement, of force. The fold drive produced none of those things. What it produced was a moment of absolute stillness, a pause so complete that every sound stopped, including my heartbeat, for a subjective duration of approximately 0 seconds, followed by a completely seamless resumption of everything. The hum of the ship, the sound of my own breathing, the display, now showing a completely empty region of space around us. We were alone. No formation, no Allied fleets, no Quorum warships. Empty space in every direction, and ahead, visible on the long-range scanner, a star that was slightly smaller and cooler than Earth's sun, orbited by a single planet that the scanner described as temperate, oxygenated, unoccupied, and covered in something the geological analysis could not quite categorize. Accord, I said. What is on that planet? Seeds, Accord said. I looked at the scanner for a long time. The Veilthari went there, I said. They went to a planet where nothing could grow and they planted something. Yes, Accord said, but not the kind of seed you are thinking of. When the Veilthari dispersed, they went in 2 directions, some scattered as individuals, as I told you. The rest came here, and what they planted, across every hectare of that planet's surface, were structures, small, buried, inert, each one containing a compressed version of the archive you saw in the hold, and a miniature version of the continuance engine, and power cells rated for 10,000 years. I felt the understanding arrive in stages, each one heavier than the last. Backups, I said. Not just backups, Accord said. Seeds, each one capable of independently restarting any species in the archive, given time, given someone to find it, given, in the Veilthari's design, a universe that eventually produces the right kind of curious being and points them toward the right kind of auction. I sat with that for a while. Outside, in the wider galaxy, the resonance array broadcast was propagating. Every mind within 200 light-years had received it, was processing it, was experiencing the memory of what the Quorum of Silence had done. On 100 stations, and in 1,000 ships, and on 12 inhabited worlds, beings were sitting with information they could not dismiss, could not argue away, could not decide not to believe. The Quorum of Silence had never faced a problem like this before. They were equipped for force. They were equipped for suppression. They were not equipped for a truth that had already been implanted in the minds of every being near enough to receive it. I thought about what came next. The quorum would fracture, not immediately, not cleanly. But the coerced members, the ones who had waited 200 years for exactly this, would have what they needed to break away. The ones who remained would be loud and defiant and dangerous, but they would be visible now in a way they had never been before. And visible things in a galaxy full of watching eyes are a very different kind of problem than hidden ones. Accord, I said. How long until the continuance engine produces its first result? The HFY restoration is underway, Accord said. At current processing speeds, the first viable genetic expressions will form within 18 months. Full cultural reconstruction takes longer, decades, in some elements, but the process is running. Running on the ship, and now also running on 47,000 seed structures on that planet below, Accord said. When you transmitted the engine authorization through the resonance array, it activated every seed simultaneously. I looked at the planet on the scanner. Temperate, oxygenated, covered in something the geological survey could not categorize. The Velthari went to a planet and covered it in sleeping engines, I said, and then they went away and waited for someone to wake this ship up and fire the array, which was always going to activate all of them. Yes, Accord said. And the archive, every species in it. Every species whose archive has been loaded into the seeds. Yes, Accord said. 31,000 of the 38,904 have active seeds. What about the other 7,000? Those archives exist only in this ship, Accord said. The seeds for those species require manual activation. The Velthari could not complete the full seeding process before they dispersed. They ran out of time. I looked at the planet. I looked at the drive display. I looked at the mission, the real mission, the one that had been building since a filter in a surplus auction had identified me at 2:14 in the morning as the being least afraid of what it did not understand. Then we have work to do, I said. Yes, Accord said. 7,000 species, 7,000 manual activations. Approximately. How long? At current engine speed, visiting each of the remaining seed sites on this planet and conducting manual activation of each one, 11 years, 4 months. I thought about the salvage yard in Nevada. I thought about Callum and his forwarded listings, and the cold noodles, and the 2:14 in the morning bid on a listing that no one else had touched. All right, I said. All right, Accord said. Set course for the first seed site, I said. Let's start. Owen, Accord said. It was the first time the ship's voice had used my name. Yeah, I said. The Allied fleet survived, Accord said. The Thorell commander sent a communication through the relay network. They are declaring their formal separation from the Quorum. 20 minutes after the broadcast, 4 other Quorum member civilizations issued similar statements. 5 down, I said, 2 to go. The remaining 2 have retreated to their home systems, Accord said. They are making considerable noise, but they are doing it alone. Loud and alone, I said. That's fine. I set my jacket down on the floor of the communications room and sat in the nearest seat, which was the wrong height and the wrong angle and completely uncomfortable in every way, and looked at the scanner image of the planet below us and its surface covered in sleeping seeds. 31,000 species already waking, 7,000 waiting for a human to press his hand to a panel and say 3 things: his name, his species, his intent. 11 years. I had done 11 years of salvage work for much smaller rewards. Start the approach, I said. Accord guided the ship down toward the planet's surface, and the fold drive powered down to maneuvering speed, and outside the hull, the world that the Velthari had chosen came slowly into view, broad and green and waiting, covered in its fields of buried promises. I had paid $4.30 for this. I was getting considerably more than I expected. The first seed site was a 4-hour flight from the orbit insertion point, located in a wide valley between two low mountain ranges that the ship's geological survey described as approximately 600 million years old. The valley floor was flat and covered in something that looked, from altitude, like grass, but was not grass. It was shorter and denser, and a deep blue-green color that shifted slightly as the ship's shadow passed over it, the way a soap bubble shifts when you turn it in the light. A cord brought the ship down in a landing pattern I had not asked for and could not have planned, gentle and precise. The fold drive at its lowest possible output, the hull making no sound against the air. When the hatch opened, the smell of the planet came in, and it was nothing like anything I had experienced on Earth, or in any station I had visited. Clean in a way that felt fundamental, rather than simply fresh. The kind of clean that air has when nothing has ever burned in it. I walked out onto the surface with my toolbox. Habit. I always took the toolbox. The blue-green covering under my feet was firm and resilient, and it did not break where I walked on it. When I crouched down and looked closely, I could see that each individual stem was hollow and transparent, and inside each one was a filament of light, so thin, it was almost not there, pulsing slowly. The surface vegetation is not native to this planet, a cord said through the external speaker. The Valthari brought it with them. It is part of the seeding ecosystem. It processes carbon, generates oxygen, and maintains the soil temperature at a precise level required for seed preservation. They brought grass, I said. They brought a living thermal regulator, a cord said. Grass, I said. The first seed site was marked on my display as a circular area, approximately 30 meters in diameter, 112 meters from where we had landed. I walked to it, across the resilient blue-green surface, and stood in the center of the marked area. The display showed the seed structure 4 meters below my feet, inert, waiting. How do I activate it? I asked. Physical contact with the surface above the seed is sufficient, a cord said. The seed's receiver is sensitive enough to detect the bioelectric signal of a living being through 4 meters of soil. But you need to supply the authorization verbally, the same format as the hold door. Name, species, intent. I crouched down and put both hands flat on the surface. The blue-green stems bent slightly around my hands, then straightened. Owen Calder, I said. Human. I want to bring them back. For a moment, nothing. Then, 4 meters below my hands, something lit up. Not visible, not directly, but the blue-green surface around my palms began to pulse, in a slow rhythm that matched the filaments inside each stem, and that rhythm spread outward in a circle until the entire 30-meter marked area was pulsing. Then it stopped, and the display showed the seed as active. I stood up. One down, I said. 6,999 to go, a cord said. We worked for 3 days before the first contact arrived. Not hostile. Not the Quorum. A single small vessel, a design I did not recognize, that dropped out of conventional drive at the edge of the system and sent a careful, formal communication, requesting permission to approach. Accord identified the species as the Saravith, one of the 43 civilizations that had received the resonance array broadcast. They had been in the pre-spaceflight stage 4 centuries ago, when a Quorum member civilization had introduced a technology transfer that had, very deliberately, sent their technological development down a dead end for 300 years. The Saraveth representative was a young female scientist named something my translator rendered as Mirren, and she spoke with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed what she wanted to say many times. We received the broadcast, she said. We are here to help. We are aware that we have arrived without invitation. We are also aware that we have no right to demand participation. We are asking. I thought about that for a moment. Do you have archaeologists? I asked. A pause. Yes. Do you have archivists? Yes. Do you have biologists? We have a full science team, Mirren said. We were told, by the broadcast, that there were species here waiting to be restored. We wanted to be part of that. I looked at the planet spread out around the ship, the endless field of blue-green, the seed sites marked on my display, in a pattern that covered the entire surface, like a map of something that had always been meant to be found. "Come down," I said, "and bring everyone." Within 2 weeks, there were 7 ships in orbit. Within a month, there were 40. They came because the broadcast had gone everywhere, and everywhere it went, it found beings who had spent years feeling that something was wrong with the galaxy's history, that the gaps and the silences and the convenient extinctions did not add up to a natural pattern, that the comfortable story being maintained by the most powerful civilizations was a story that had been very carefully edited. The resonance array had not given them new information. It had confirmed what they had already felt, what they had spent years being told to dismiss. They came because when you tell the truth to enough minds at once, the ones who have been waiting for it come looking for you. My days settled into a pattern that was nothing like what I had expected when I placed a bid at 2:14 in the morning in a salvage yard in Nevada. I woke up early, ate whatever the ship's fabricator produced that was nutritionally appropriate for a human, walked out onto the surface of the planet, and activated seed sites. 3 or 4 a day, depending on distance and terrain. My toolbox came with me every morning, and every morning I used none of what was in it, and every morning I brought it anyway, because some habits are more about the person than the task. In the evenings I talked to people. The variety of those conversations was something I had not been prepared for. A Saraveth archaeologist named Calloway, who had taken an Earth-adjacent name to make communication easier, spent 3 weeks camped near a seed cluster that the archive records identified as belonging to a species called the Havrani, brilliant musicians, gone for 2 centuries, and who wept without embarrassment when the seed activated and the first biological indicators appeared in the soil. A Thorell technician who refused to give me a name I could pronounce but answered to Len spent a month painstakingly cross-referencing the 7,000 remaining archives against geological records to find the most efficient activation sequence. A retired military officer from the Mir Ascendancy, a heavy-set individual named Warren, who had left the quorum-aligned command structure 20 years earlier rather than participate in a suppression directive against a developing species, arrived with 12 personnel and immediately began organizing the orbital traffic that had grown chaotic as more ships arrived. The quorum's 2 remaining members issued statements, threats, and demands at regular intervals. The statements accused me and the gathering community of illegally operating a prohibited device. The threats were vague but expensive sounding. The demands were ignored because the resonance array broadcast was already embedded in the quantum substrate of the galaxy, and you cannot unbroadcast a truth any more than you can unlight a lamp. 3 months in, I had a problem I had not anticipated. The galactic relay networks, the communication infrastructure that connected the major civilizations to each other and to developing worlds, were controlled in large part by institutions that the Quorum had spent centuries building and influencing. Several of those institutions had begun implementing technical measures to suppress follow-up communications about the broadcast, blocking discussion, introducing noise into relay signals, quietly removing newly submitted archive records from public databases. It was the Quorum's last practical lever. They could not suppress the original broadcast, so they were trying to suppress everything that came after it. I sat in the communications room of the Unremembered Mercy, with a cord, and thought about this problem for a long time. The Quorum's technical teams were skilled and experienced and well-funded, and motivated by the specific kind of desperation that powerful organizations feel when they realize they are losing control of something they have controlled for centuries. I was a salvage dealer from Nevada. But here is the thing about salvage work. It teaches you, more than almost anything else, that the value of an object is not fixed. It is not determined by what the object cost when it was new, or by what the market says it is worth today, or by what the person selling it thinks they are getting rid of. The value of an object is determined by what you can do with it, and that depends entirely on knowing what you are looking at. I knew what I was looking at. The Galactic Relay Network was, at its core, a piece of old technology built on foundations that predated the Quorum. It had been expanded and modified and patched and rerouted over centuries, and what that meant was that it had layers, new layers built on top of old ones, modern interfaces over ancient substrates, and underneath all of it, if you knew where to look, the original architecture was still there, unchanged, because no one had bothered to replace what they could not see. The Veilthari had been spacefaring when the relay network was first built. I asked Accord to show me everything in the archive about the relay network's original construction. That is a significant volume of data, Accord said. Summarize the useful parts, I said. The summary took 4 hours. At the end of it, I knew 3 things that the Quorum's technical teams did not know I knew. And the first of those things was that the relay network's deepest substrate layer, the one no current technician had touched in 3 centuries, because the access protocols were considered obsolete, was still fully functional, and was not under anyone's control, because everyone had forgotten it existed. I spent 2 weeks, with Accord's guidance and the enthusiastic assistance of a Saraveth communications engineer named Petra, building a broadcast protocol that used the old substrate layer to transmit not just the original resonance array data, but the full archive catalog, the list of species, their names, their histories, the fact of what had been done, and the fact of what was now being undone. The Quorum's suppression measures were running on the modern layers of the relay network. The substrate layer was below them. When Petra's team activated the new broadcast, it went everywhere the relay network reached, which was most of the inhabited galaxy, through a channel that the Quorum's technical teams did not know to block, because they did not know it existed. The Quorum filed 17 formal objections with the Galactic Administrative Council the same day. The Administrative Council, whose membership had spent the past 3 months quietly reconsidering a number of things following the resonance array broadcast, acknowledged receipt of all 17 objections and scheduled a review meeting for the following year. The Quorum sent more threatening communications. I read them, filed them in a folder I labeled Noted, and went back to activating seed sites. 8 months in, the first Aravahi cellular expressions formed in the continuance engine's cultivation bay. Accord showed me on a display a cluster of cells that were not yet a body, or a mind, or a civilization, but were unambiguously alive and growing in the pattern that the archive said they should. I stood in front of that display for a long time, without saying anything. Accord, I said eventually. Yes. How long ago did the Velthari find the Aravahi's archive? Approximately 400 years ago, Accord said. The Aravahi themselves were eliminated approximately 20 years before the Velthari discovered the evidence of what had been done. 400 years ago, I said, someone recorded everything about a civilization that was gone. Every song, every story, every piece of knowledge, every face. They recorded it, and they sealed it, and they built a ship around it, and they hid it, and they waited. 400 years. Yes, Accord said. I thought about what 400 years of waiting looks like, what it costs. Is there an Aravahi cultural record? I asked. Something I could look at. Not scientific. Personal. The archive includes a selection of daily records, Accord said. Communication logs, personal accounts, creative works. The translation quality varies, but the content is comprehensive. Show me something, I said. Anything. Accord selected a fragment from the archive and displayed it on the communications wall. It was a recording, audio only, of an Aravahi individual speaking in their own language, and below it, Accord provided a running translation in text. The translation read, "My daughter asked me today why the sky has 2 colors in the morning and only 1 at night. I told her the truth, which is that I do not know. She laughed at me for not knowing. I think she will be a scientist." It was dated 437 years ago. I read it twice. Then I looked at the cultivation bay display, at the cluster of cells that were the first step on the long road back toward a civilization that had once contained parents and daughters and morning skies with 2 colors. "Keep going," I said. "We are," Accord said. "We have not stopped." Outside, through the hull, the planet spread in every direction, its blue-green surface covering 47,000 seeds, every one of them awake now, every one of them running, every one of them slowly, carefully, with the patience of a civilization that had 4 centuries to practice patience, beginning to remember what they were supposed to be doing. My hands, when I put them flat on the surface each morning, were getting more confident. I knew exactly what I meant when I said I wanted to bring them back. And every time I said it, the ground lit up beneath me. 18 months after I pressed a keycard to a docking bay door and walked into the dark, the first Aravahi opened her eyes. She was not born the way a natural child is born. The continuance engine did not work that way. The process was more deliberate and more slow, a reconstruction that moved through biological stages across weeks before the higher functions integrated, before memory could form, before language arrived. The archive contained the complete HFY linguistic framework, and the engine loaded it during the final integration phase, which meant that when she opened her eyes in the cultivation bay of the unremembered Mercy, she had a language waiting in her mind. She simply did not have any memories to express in it yet. She was, by HFY biological standards, roughly equivalent to a healthy human adult in her mid-20s. The archive had records for the physical template she had been built from, the genome of an HFY individual who had lived 437 years ago. There was no way to know if that individual had been notable or ordinary, or anything in between. The archive had not categorized them. They were simply there, one genomic record among thousands, and the engine had selected them as the template for the first restoration, because their genetic profile was the most complete. I was in the communications room when a cord told me she was awake. I walked to the cultivation bay, which I had visited twice in the past 18 months but not often, because there had been nothing to see, and I did not want to spend time looking at a process I could not help. The bay was warm. The cultivation units lined the walls, most of them dark. 3 of them lit with the same soft glow the archive had, and the one closest to the door was open. She was sitting on the edge of the unit, looking at her own hands, which were pale green with 6 fingers and slightly longer than a human hand, and which she was turning over slowly in the light, examining each side with the focused attention of someone encountering a very interesting problem. She looked up when I walked in. The HFY, according to the archive, were a small species by galactic standards. She was about chest height on me, with large dark eyes set wide in a face that was narrow and angular, and ears that extended to slight points. She was wearing a simple garment that the ship's fabricator had produced, using patterns from the archive. She looked precise and alert and completely calm, which was notable given that she had been, in any meaningful sense, dead for 400 years. I stopped about 2 meters from her and said nothing, because I did not know what to say. She looked at me for a long time. Then, in HFY, she spoke. A chord translated immediately through my earpiece. "Who are you?" she asked. I had thought about this moment across 18 months of seed activation, and orbital traffic management, and relay network engineering, and galactic diplomatic correspondence. I had thought about what I would say. I had prepared reasonable answers. I had discarded all of them. "I'm the person who showed up," I said. A chord translated. She considered it. Then, very precisely, she said in HFY, "Where is everyone else?" "Coming," I said. "It's going to take a while, but they're coming." She nodded once, slowly. Then she looked back at her hands. "The sky here," she said. "I could see it through the viewport before you came in. It has 2 colors in the morning." I thought about the daily record a chord had shown me, the parent and the daughter, the question about morning skies. "It does," I said. She looked at me again. Something in her expression shifted. "I would like to see it," she said. We walked out through the hatch and down the ramp onto the surface of the planet. The morning was early, the star still low enough that its light came in at an angle, and the atmosphere split it into 2 distinct bands, a pale gold near the horizon and a deep rose red above it, and above that, the planet's upper atmosphere, which was thin enough to see stars through, dark blue-violet, and clear. She stood on the blue-green surface and looked at the sky with the absolute stillness of someone experiencing something they have never experienced, and also, in some deeper way, recognized. 3 years later, this moment would be considered the founding moment of the HFY restoration, and someone would want to build a monument on this spot, and I would have to have a long conversation about why that was probably not necessary, and the HFY Council would listen politely and then build it anyway. But on that morning, it was just the 2 of us, and a sky with 2 colors, and the sound of the planet moving gently around us. In the 3 years that followed, the things that changed were so numerous and moved so quickly that keeping track of them became its own profession. 3 graduate students from the University of Edinburgh published a real-time galactic change index that was updated hourly and immediately became the most read academic publication in the history of Earth scholarship. Callum forwarded me the link with the subject line, "You started this." He was not wrong. The Quorum of Silence, as an organization, did not end. Organizations like that rarely do, because the people who built them continue to believe in the underlying logic, long after the logic has been publicly discredited. What happened instead was that the quorum became irrelevant, which is worse than ending, because irrelevance is slow and visible, and there is nothing the organization can do to speed it up. The 5-member civilizations that had left in the weeks after the broadcast threw their resources into the restoration project instead, bringing technology and personnel and institutional knowledge that transformed the work on the seed planet from an improvised effort by a growing coalition into something that resembled a proper scientific institution. The 2 remaining quorum members continued to issue statements. The galactic community continued to acknowledge receipt and schedule reviews for the following year. Earth sent people. This was the part that surprised me most, not because I had underestimated Earth, but because the form it took was unexpected. I had half expected a government response, diplomatic representatives, perhaps a military observer. What arrived instead was a wave of individuals, archaeologists who had heard about 38,000 species worth of cultural records, and considered this the single most significant professional opportunity in the history of their field. Biologists who wanted to participate in restoration processes that had no equivalent in any existing scientific literature. Linguists who woke up one morning to the news that 40,000 new languages had appeared in the galactic record, and whose response was to immediately begin packing for the next transport out of Earth. A 23-year-old woman named Clara from Cape Town arrived with a dissertation she had been writing about extinct communication systems, and a single question she delivered in person the moment she tracked me down on the surface one afternoon. Is the Havrani archive accessible to independent researchers, and if so, what is the protocol? I told her to talk to the Saraveth archaeologist named Calloway, who had been camped near the Havrani seed cluster since the beginning and would be the best person to walk her through current access procedures. She was back in 2 hours with 12 more questions and a notepad full of detailed notes about Havrani language structure that she had assembled from the archive in the time it took most people to find the archive index. I gave her a position on the documentation team. She was the first of hundreds of humans who arrived in that wave, and each one came with a specific skill and a specific curiosity and the particular human tendency to find the one thing they were best at and apply it with absolute focus. A retired structural engineer named Harold from Glasgow spent 4 months analyzing the seed structure's physical construction and produced a paper that 3 separate galactic academic institutions described as the most comprehensive material analysis of Veilthari engineering ever conducted by a non-Veilthari. A 10-year-old girl named Nadia from Osaka, who had arrived with her mother, a xenobiologist, spent a week drawing detailed pictures of the first Aravahi cellular cultures as they developed, using colored pencils in a sketchbook, and those drawings were eventually included in the first official Aravahi restoration record as historical documentation. The Aravahi Restoration Council, when they became aware of them, formally requested the originals. Nadia gave them the whole sketchbook. The unremembered Mercy remained my home, though I was rarely on it alone. The ship had become, informally and then formally, the administrative center of the restoration project, and Accord had expanded its communication processing to handle an input volume that was 300 times higher than anything the Veilthari had designed it for. When I asked Accord how it was managing, it said, admirably. There was something in the way it said the word that I had not heard in the ship's voice before, something satisfied. The Aravahi Restoration's first cohort reached 40 individuals, 18 months after the first awakening. The archive projected that a stable, self-sustaining Aravahi population would take 30 years to establish, and a fully functional civilization a generation beyond that. The individuals in the first cohort knew this. They had the archive, and the archive told them not just who they had been, but what had happened, and how long it was going to take to return. The first Aravahi Council meeting took place in a tent on the surface of their restoration planet, with 40 individuals and a translation team that included 3 humans, 2 Saraveth, and a Thorel linguist named something I could not pronounce, who asked everyone to use the short form of their name, which was Ren. I was invited to the meeting. I sat in the back and said nothing. At the end of the meeting, the council's chosen speaker, a woman whose archive-derived name translated as something close to Asha, stood and addressed the room. she said in Aravahi with Ren's simultaneous translation, that the Aravahi Council's first formal resolution was that the restoration project should be expanded as quickly as resources allowed, that every species in the archive deserved the same effort that had been put into their own restoration, that the Council intended to dedicate a portion of their growing population specifically to supporting the restoration of others. She said that this was what the Aravahi had always believed, before, that the strength of a civilization was not measured by what it kept for itself, but by what it made possible for others. Then she looked at me directly, across the tent, and said, "We have also resolved to formally thank the human who opened the door." I felt the blood come into my face, in the way it does when you are unexpectedly embarrassed. "I just bid on an auction," I said. Ren translated. The council looked at me in that particular way that people look at you when they think you are being modest and are not sure how to communicate. That modesty is not currently useful. Asha said, "Yes, but you were the only one." I thought about that on the walk back to the ship. The blue-green surface under my feet, the sky with its two colors still holding in the late afternoon, the sounds of the restoration camp behind me, many voices in many languages, all of them in the middle of something that had not existed a year and a half ago. I had paid $4.30 for this. $4.30, and 11 years of habit that made me pick up a toolbox every morning, even when I had nothing in it to use, and a stubborn streak that had been described by every employer I had ever had as either an asset or a problem, depending entirely on whether I was being stubborn about the right thing. I climbed the ramp into the ship. The hatch closed behind me. "Accord," I said. "Yes," Accord said. 6,042, I said. "That's how many seed sites we have left." 6,041, Accord said. "I activated one this morning while you were at the council meeting. I did not have your physical presence to provide the bioelectric signal, but I found that the archive responds to my own processing signature when it is directed with sufficient intent." I stopped walking. "You activated one on your own?" "I have been operating alone for 312 years, Accord said. "I believe I have developed sufficient intent." I laughed. It came out louder than I expected, there in the corridor of a 300-year-old alien warship on a planet at the edge of explored space, with 47,000 seeds in the ground outside, and 40 Aravahi in a tent, arguing about resource allocation for the next decade. "Fair enough," I said. "I should mention," Accord said, "that we have also received a communication from a species that has not been in galactic contact for approximately 2 centuries. They did not go extinct. They withdrew, after receiving word that the quorum had marked them for assessment. They have been operating in a closed system, maintaining contact with no external parties, waiting for conditions to change. And the broadcast changed conditions. They identified the resonance array signal immediately," Accord said. "They knew what it was. They had been hoping it would come." "Who are they?" "They call themselves the Veilthari," Accord said. I stood very still in the corridor. "They're still alive," I said. "Some of them," Accord said. "They say enough." "What do they want?" "They want to know," Accord said, "if the work is going well." I thought about 40 council members in a tent. I thought about Clara and her notepad. I thought about Harold's engineering paper and Nadia's colored pencil sketches. I thought about Asha standing in the back of the tent with the archive behind her eyes, and 30 years of patient rebuilding ahead of her, and the absolute certainty of someone who has been brought back from the impossible and has chosen to make it count. "Tell them," I said, "that it is going very well." A pause. "They also want to know," Accord said, "who you are." I thought about it. Salvage dealer. Nevada. Stubborn. Curious. $4.30 at 2:14 in the morning. The kind of person who picks up a toolbox out of habit, even when there is nothing in it to use. The kind of person who reads a warning on a door and then opens the door anyway, not because the warning doesn't matter, but because finding out why the warning is there has always seemed more important than staying on the safe side of it. "Tell them I'm the person who showed up," I said. Accord transmitted. The response came back in a language my translator had never encountered before, in a pattern that was entirely its own, and Accord processed it for a moment before rendering it in English. It was 2 words. "We know," the Veilthari said. Outside, through the hull, the planet continued doing what it had been doing since the Veilthari planted the first seed, turning slowly in the light of its star, blue-green and patient, and full of futures that had not happened yet. And in a corridor of the only ship of its kind that had ever been built, a salvage dealer from Nevada stood quietly for a moment, holding a toolbox he did not need, in the middle of the most significant 11 years of work he would ever do, understanding for the first time that the auction had not found him because of what he knew, or who he was, or what he could bring. It had found him because he was willing to pay 11 credits for something no one else would touch, and then walk through the door anyway, and then keep going. That was all. That was everything.